Hey everyone, it's Drew Wilson. Thanks for watching the Introduction to JSON video. In this video, I'm going to be going over JSON, what it is, kind of the basics and fundamentals of how to use it. If you want more in-depth information, visit json.org. They got everything there for you listed out, so go ahead and check that out for more in-depth information. But for this video, I'm kind of covering the basics of JSON and what it is. So, what is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it's just that. JSON is native to JavaScript, so there's nothing extra or anything else you have to do. It's already in JavaScript, and all it is just the format in which you write an object in JavaScript. So what is an object? I have a little old school visual here to kind of show you. You can think of an object as this folder. Inside the folder we have a lot of data stored here. So for instance, in the folder we might have you can think of this letter here as like a username or something, or some string value. Here's another value. You know, this might be a date or something. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different keys and values stored inside of an object, kind of like an array. But also an object, you can store another object inside of an object, which has all of its own values. It could have arrays, could have even more objects. So you can kind of see that the depth is kind of infinite with an object. So it's a really great way to store data. Much better than an array, or in another format you can store data with XML or other ways. But JSON is much better when using JavaScript because it is native to JavaScript. It is JavaScript. There's nothing extra. So it's very lightweight, and in that sense it's much better to use than, as I was saying, XML. For instance, if you were to store all your data in XML, XML is a markup language, so there's a bunch of markup you have to do to structure it and have it validate and have it, work with everybody else, follow the standards. With JSON, all you have to do is follow this extremely simple format, and it's native JavaScript code. It's not anything else, so that you don't have to parse an XML file and then turn that into something. So JSON is very lightweight, and in that sense it makes it very powerful because it can store pretty much anything. A good question to ask yourself when developing a web application is, am I using JavaScript? And most likely you are. So I suggest then you use JSON. JSON will make things much quicker and easier to use within JavaScript. And it's pretty easy to set up. All you have to do is set up your server-side code to return the data from your database in the JSON format. We'll go over that a little bit later. Another question that comes up is, what about JSON versus arrays? What's the difference, and what should I know about it? Well, all you need to know is that JSON wins. So when storing data and using it in JavaScript, arrays, it's not really a direct comparison between the two, because JSON can store arrays as well as other objects and other types of data like strings and booleans. So when presented with this question, JSON versus arrays, go with JSON, because you can store arrays inside of it. So it's a little bit broader scope than arrays. So I'm sure the next question you might have is, what does a JSON object look like? Well, if you look right here, you can see a JSON object is always surrounded by curly braces on either side. In JavaScript, if we were to declare a new JSON object, we can declare an empty one by just doing var data, the name of the object, equals, and a blank object. If we wanted to write a basic JSON object, here's an example right here. Inside the object, we have two keys, and each one has a value. So our object has a property of name, and the property's value is foo. It has a property of city, and the value of that is San Diego. And notice they're separated with a comma here, and then there's a colon there to separate the property and the value. If we want to look at a complex example, we look down here, and this property sand is storing a boolean of true, and this property of water is storing a string called clear blue. And if you look over here, there's another property extra, which has a value of data. Now data would be an object. So the way we can do that right here, let's get rid of that. Okay, so now in JavaScript we just say data, which was our blank object, equals this object. So now this data over here gets put in right here. So our extra information is an object. So the extra information here is going to contain this object here, which contains all this data. So you can kind of see how powerful that gets when you can have a very complex object, or simple, and store that like this, and then you'll be able to pull it out later. So with an object, you can store a lot of data and a lot of information. Alright, so now let's go over how to pull values from your JSON object. As you see, I've made some changes here. This object I've named a variable named bar, and down here this variable data is equal to this object, which contains the bar variable, the bar object right here. So data contains this information as well as this information. So if we wanted to pull out the value of water here, and we wanted to display the words clear blue, we could do that just by doing this. Now by doing data.water, I'm referencing right here this data object, and then I'm going into it and referencing the property water. And so this will end up giving me back the value clear blue. So I could wrap it in an alert. And this alert, when run in JavaScript, would alert clear blue. Now I also have a Boolean stored in my data object. The property sand has Boolean true. So if I go ahead, I can write an if statement wrapped around this here. So let's write this out. So in my if statement here, I'm saying if data.sand, then alert it's a beach. So down here sand, it has a value of true. So this will evaluate to true, and then it will run the alert. If this were set to false, this alert would not run. So that's how to use Booleans with objects. For this next example, I'm going to show you how to reference an object within an object in JavaScript. And this is when JSON really starts to become actually valuable and useful, when you can access objects inside objects inside objects, and when they're nested, the dot format, which is what I showed you earlier, is a really easy way to pull values out of your objects. So let's go ahead and pull out the name out of the data object. So I'll show you how to do that real quick. So as you can see right here, data.extra.name will return foo. And this is the dot format I was talking about. We have the object, and then we go into it using the dot, and we grab the extra object, which is, or the extra property, which is down here. And then we go into that again with the dot, and we grab the name property, which is this one, which will return the value of name. So it will return foo. In addition to the dot format, you can use the bracket format, which looks like this. These two are identical. This is getting the data object, and then I'm grabbing the extra property, and then inside there I'm grabbing the name property. You might notice that this looks very similar to the way you access arrays, and it is. This way there's a little extra typing you have to do. This way is a little bit simpler. But you'll find that this, in some cases, this might work a little easier for different things than this will, and vice versa. So either way, those are two different ways you can access your data. Now I wanted to give you another example of a more complex object. This object here is remained the same. The bar object I've made a little more complex, and now it contains an array with multiple objects inside of it. And I'll show you what that looks like. Right here on the first property we have props. Its value is this array right here. The array is separated by these brackets here. That's the array syntax for an object. Inside the array we have two different items here. We have the first one, which is an object, and the second one, which is an object. Now arrays are zero based, so the index for this one, since it's not set here, it's not an object, would be 0. And the index for this one is defaulted to 1. Now you could change these here just like we have this here by giving it a property first, but by not declaring any property, it's going to be set to 0, and this one will be set to 1. So inside of this this item here, this array item, we have an object that has multiple values. Same with this object over here. And then inside this main object here, aside from the props array here, we have a help property which is set to Boolean to false. So if I wanted to access this kind property and display the word human here, I would have to dig into this, which is inside of this object here, over here, referenced at bar. So the way we would do that is we would write out data.extra, which is going into this property here, and then to the props, which is this item here, and then we're gonna pull out the first item in the array, which right here, 0. This first item is this object. So right now, X is set to this object here, this first one. And the reason I have this variable X here is because it's easier to reference. If we're going to be working inside this specific object here, and in real practice there would be a much larger object, it's easier for me to access it with the variable of X or whatever you use, rather than writing out this every single time. So just for the sake of writing less code, I've made this variable X here equal to this object here, and all I have to do to alert this kind and get the result human here is just do x.kind, and basically that's just adding the .kind onto the end here, which would give me this one. Now if I wanted to alter or change, update a value of one of the object properties, you can do that very easy in JavaScript. I would do x.kind, which right now is set to human, equals fish or whatever. And now if I were to alert x.kind, it would come back as fish. And I've updated this object now and changed this kind value to be fish. So it's really easy. All you have to do is just reference the object property you want and then set it equal to whatever you want it to equal to. You could even have it equal another object. So you can change things on the fly, and then when you return, if I were to return this data item below this line here, below where I've changed this to fish, the object data would have fish in here as the kind. So I permanently altered this whole data object, which can be useful sometimes. If you don't want to permanently alter it, you can always copy out the data object and into a new object. So that's a really easy way to update and change values within objects. So another important part in web application development is getting data from your database onto the page. And a great way to do that, as I've said before, is by using JSON. But as far as the server side goes, setting up PHP or any other server side language to return the data from your database in JSON can be actually really easy. So I want to show you how to do that right here. So in this PHP tags right here, we have 2 lines of code. The first line is the header line. What you want to do is you want to return the results back from the server when you use Ajax to query the server. You want to return the results back in the content type of JSON. So that way the browser and the HTML document knows that it's JSON. So the way to do that is to set the header content type to application/JSON. And that right there is all you got to do for that. Next up, you want to return your results. So in this very simple case, I'm not querying the database to get any data or anything. I'm just going to return some static data. So the way to do that is just to echo out some formatted JSON, just like this, right? And so we have key values and everything like that, like we went over. And right now, if I request this script in Ajax, it will return back JSON, and then I can use this data right here. And this will be from the server side. So obviously, you can replace these values with PHP variables and everything like that that you grab from the database. But that's how to do it in its most simple form. There are utilities in PHP like JSON encode and decode to work with JSON. That's available in PHP 5 and later. So those make it way easier to do more complex JSON things. This is just a very, very simple, basic example, and I'm going to show you right now a little more complex example with you turning PHP arrays into valid JSON and being able to use all your PHP data and easily turn them into JSON using PHP's JSON encode and decode. So this is a bit more complex example of turning PHP variables and arrays into valid and structured JSON. So if we look right here, I'm doing the same thing up here, but right here I'm declaring a PHP variable, myObj, and that's equal to this JavaScript object the JSON object that I showed you before. I also have a PHP variable called count that's equal to 2. And so all we do down here is we echo JSON, we echo the array, but we wrap it in a JSON encode PHP function, which will go ahead and encode our PHP array into JSON. So I can go ahead and say array, which is the PHP way to declare an array. And in this array I have two items. I have the items, and that is equal to this right here, this object, as you can see. And I have the count, which is equal to this count here. So this right here will be structured into valid JSON, and when you request this script here via AJAX from your JavaScript file, it will return back this object as well as this count, and you can access that in JavaScript. Okay, so now that you understand how JSON is formatted and works in JavaScript, and you understand how to set up the server to return JSON, let's look at how you can put those two together and request some data and then do something with it. If you're using jQuery, which I suggest you do, they have a method called getJSON already built in for you. And what that does, it takes two arguments here. One of them is the URL to your scripts right here. So I just have mysite.com/my/script, which will pull up that PHP script that we wrote. And then we have a callback function for when it finishes and it gets all the data. So this function right here, I'm going to pass through the data that comes back, and I'm naming it data here. Alright, so the data that comes back from the PHP script that gets echoed is going to be called data. And so down here, inside of the callback function, I'm going to create a variable called items. And that items is going to equal the data object that got sent back to me, and then the property that was in that object that we wrote called items, and the first array item in there. So in this object right here, there are a couple different values that we had written in there, and so I can go ahead and alert items.key, which will be getting the value for the property key. So as you can see, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is set up an AJAX request, get back some data, and now you have access to this data object here, and you can pull things out of it. You can do whatever you want with it. You can set up a for loop to go through each data item and do something with it. You could set up a list of HTML, unordered list. You can set up an HTML unordered list and go through it for each data item. You can pull out, if you stored a name in the object, you could go through each name in the data object and list out the name in the HTML unordered list. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. Makes it really easy. So that's basically how JSON works when talking to the server and returning it back. So those are the basic and fundamentals of working with JSON. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and got to learn a little more about JSON and what it is and how you can use it. You should have enough now to go ahead and put into practice what you've learned and create a JSON server. If you'd like more information about JSON in general, go to json.org. There's a bunch of information there for you to check out as well. Follow my blog. I'll keep talking about it. Also, Firef.com is a CMS that I wrote, and it's essentially a JSON server, and you interact with all your data via JSON. So it's really a different kind of CMS. It uses totally different technology. It uses technology called Titan. Titan is an open source JavaScript web framework that myself and some of my partners wrote, and it's available at titanproject.org. I still have to do documentation for it and put it up there, but it'll be available shortly. And Titan essentially interfaces with your JSON server and makes it easy to pull out the data and work with the data in JavaScript or in HTML, CSS. So if you like, check out some of these websites to get more information on JSON. But thanks again for watching, and see you next time.